When I heard the news that season 3 would be the last season of Ted Lasso, I was genuinely shocked. I had seen so much hype around the premiere of season 3, which included the team being playable in FIFA, the fact that Jason Sudeikis would be paid $1 million per episode, the brand deals with Nike, not to mention the bazillions of nominations and awards that the show received. So the fact that this would be the last season shocked me. Don't people like making money? Because Ted Lasso has made a boatload of money. And honestly, when I started watching the show, I was skeptical of just how good it would be. I mean, I'm always skeptical when the masses absolutely adore something and a show wins that many awards. I mean, look at how Game of Thrones ended. When it comes to any form of entertainment, movies, TV, games, anything really, what's amazing for one person can be wildly different from what's amazing for another person.
Yeah, it's horrible. No, thank you.
People have different tastes, and I wasn't sure a comedy show about an American football coach coaching a soccer/actual football team in England would be that great, since I'm not that into sports. But to my surprise, whenever Ted Lasso is on my screen,
I can't help but root for him.
the show is created with the same feeling as being covered by a warm, cozy blanket. Every episode was filled with warm, fuzzy feelings, and watching Ted Lasso deliver the wildest dialogues in one of the most charming ways always got a smile on my face.
You know, if I didn't have any confidence, I never would have worn pajamas to my prom and ended up in jail the rest of that night. But you don't want to hear that story, so I ain't gonna tell it.
It's so refreshing to have a show filled with heart that has a lack of cynicism and pessimism with its characters. But then, between the warm, fuzzy moments where I'm covered with the blanket of Ted Lasso, there comes the moments about trauma. And those moments feel like you aren't fully covered with your blanket. Your feet are sticking out, and it's freezing out there. You want to pull the blanket over your feet, but the harder you pull, the harder you hold on, the blanket stretches to its limits, leaving gaps between the threads, and it seems to leave you more exposed than before. But as the show progresses, and you see the characters you love work and move on from what's been holding them back, you realize that your blanket would cover your feet on its own. There was no need to keep holding onto it. There was no reason to pull at it. And there was no reason to worry. Because once it settles, and every thread relaxes to close the gaps, you'll feel that warmth again. And all you had to do was let go. Now, I know most of you probably know the history of how Ted Lasso came to be. He was created as a character to star in a series of promotional videos for NBC Sports' coverage of the English Premier League. Those promotional videos were a huge hit, and later, creators Jason Sudeikis, Brendan Hunt, Joe Kelly, and Bill Lawrence landed a full season at Apple TV. So when I watched this comedy skit turned into a TV show, I was blown away. Not because it was a football show with tons of action or cool locations, or because it was a technical marvel with some very uncanny valley scenes, but because it was a show about people. Actual, genuine people. Aside from Roy Kent, who clearly isn't a real person. And as a show about people, it has a ton of problems, because people have problems. From the very beginning, the show establishes multiple characters who have tons of problems. Rebecca Welton, who has recently divorced Rupert, is struggling with feelings of self-worth and her desire to burn AFC Richmond to the ground to spite her husband. Roy Kent, who has been struggling with aging out of the sport he loves playing and the idea of life and its purpose after retiring. Jamie Tart, who is struggling with his ego and facing the challenges in his life that his ego brings. Keely Jones, initially known for her association with Jamie Tart as the celebrity girlfriend, grapples with her identity and self-worth, especially after experiencing imposter syndrome. Nate the Great, who has been struggling with his self-esteem issues after not receiving enough praise and recognition from the people close in his life. And Ted, who is struggling with living life in England and the separation and subsequent divorce from his wife.
You're not quitting, Ted. You're just letting me go.
Now, this isn't everyone who has problems throughout the show. Numerous characters also have issues. But throughout the show, there are two greater societal problems that Ted Lasso addresses: toxic masculinity and the stigma of mental health. Toxic masculinity refers to the set of cultural norms and behaviors associated with harmful representations and expectations of masculinity. These societal expectations encompass ideas like men should be aggressive, men should be dominant, men should be emotionally detached, and also, men shouldn't be vulnerable, men shouldn't be empathetic. And by far the biggest idea of toxic masculinity is the expectation for men to reject anything that society deems as feminine. These ideas and expectations are detrimental for the development of men in society, as they are pushed into a mold that they may not identify with, or be comfortable portraying, which would cause them unhappiness. Because expectations are resentments waiting to happen, whether those resentments are from other people or from within oneself. Additionally, these ideas of toxic masculinity are often underplayed with phrases and teachings such as boys will be boys, real men don't cry, or be a man. These phrases can dismiss the negative or harmful behaviors that boys or men perpetuate by just attributing it to their gender. Or, these phrases imply that masculinity is defined by certain behaviors and place pressure on men to conform to narrow stereotypes. These harmful patterns and expectations are showcased in Ted Lasso throughout the show, with many characters. For example, at the beginning of the series, Jamie embodies toxic masculinity as he is a talented player, but he's arrogant, self-centered, and disconnected from his teammates and the relationships around him, playing into the toxic stereotype of the emotionally detached man.
Coach, I'm me. Why would I want to be anything else?
His sense of entitlement and superiority for being the star player created an idea for Jamie to pursue personal success at any cost. And that is evident with his behavior as he disrespected his teammates, objectified women, and prioritized his own glory over anyone else's. As the show progresses, he experiences a series of setbacks that both humble him and provide moments of deep introspection. This allows him to go on the journey to confront his own insecurities and vulnerabilities as he begins to understand that true strength is found with emotional connection and uplifting others rather than tearing them down. Seeing Jamie transform into a positive role model for the team serves as a powerful reminder that individuals are not defined by their past mistakes, but by their willingness to confront and make positive changes to their toxic behaviors. Alongside Jamie, we see several members of the team slowly begin to show vulnerability with one another, care for one another, and at times say, "I love you" to one another.
I love you guys so very much.
On three. 1, 2, 3.
Ted begins to foster a positive team environment that encourages positive masculinity and connections with one another. Along with letting go of the ideas of toxic masculinity, Ted Lasso also sheds the stigma of mental health as well. This stigma of mental health has societal pressures just like toxic masculinity. This stigma refers to the negative attitudes, beliefs, stereotypes, and discrimination that surround mental health conditions and those who experience them because of the expectations that society has placed. These societal expectations encompass ideas like people should be emotionally resilient and not show signs of vulnerability. People should prioritize external achievements over their well-being. People should be independent and not rely on others in times of need. People should not openly discuss mental health issues. And lastly, people should just be normal. These ideas and expectations are detrimental for the development of people in society, as they are pushed into a corner in which asking for help is not only discouraged, but also looked down upon. And in this corner is where Ted Lasso shines. In Season 2, with the introduction of Dr. Sharon Fieldstone, the team's therapist, Ted Lasso begins to normalize the process of therapy. When related to sports teams, topics of mental health and self-care are often taboo, especially in male sports. So to see many of the masculine soccer players engaging in the process of therapy, it begins to let go of that stigma. Ted Lasso even serves as a prime example as he openly seeks professional help and engages with Dr. Fieldstone to address his own challenges.
I want to make an appointment.
The show also emphasizes the power of vulnerability and emotional openness as we see characters like Roy Kent, who, throughout the show, demonstrate that despite his tough and rugged exterior, he's masking his own vulnerabilities and struggles.
Just felt sad.
Roy is often stoic and emotionally detached throughout the series, which prevents him from growing into the person he wants and needs to become to live a fulfilling life after retiring.
Fuck!
As he gradually becomes more comfortable in expressing his emotions, as well as opening up to others, he begins a fulfilling journey in which he can shed the stigma of vulnerability and the stoic and emotionally detached stereotype often associated with toxic masculinity. Ted Lasso continues to foster a positive team environment that encourages both positive masculinity and a nurturing and empowering space that allows the team to become the best version of themselves on and off the field. By fostering these connections, Ted Lasso highlights that challenging societal expectations, embracing vulnerability, and cultivating healthy relationships can lead to a more inclusive understanding of masculinity and well-being.
Roy, the best we can do is to keep asking for help and accepting it when you can. And if you keep on doing that, you'll always be moving towards better.
This allows a team to let go of the ideas of toxic masculinity and the stigma of mental health, as Ted often invokes a single philosophy when dealing with these or other problems. And for Ted, that philosophy is...
Be a goldfish, Sam. Yeah?
Ted Lasso is a beacon of optimism when people have problems in the show, whether it's through the expectations of society or issues within ourselves. And the show highlights his optimism and philosophy with empathetic storytelling and the authentic portrayal of character struggles. It's innately human to have problems, and Ted's philosophy can be applied to every problem. Being a goldfish is an important philosophy that Ted follows in his day-to-day routine. It encourages everyone to have a short-term memory for the problems in life.
Let's be sad now. Let's be sad together. And then we can be a gosh darn goldfish.
Not dwelling on our struggles, as well as our sorrow or grief for too long, allows us to move forward. It allows us to recognize that we do feel sad in the moment, so that we can learn from it, grow from it, and move on.
I just wanted to make sure you're okay.
Yeah, well, I am now.
And that's a gift. It's a gift to be able to feel so passionately for something that we do become disappointed or unhappy when things don't go our way. And to be able to recognize that we felt so passionately for something, to recognize that sometimes life doesn't work out the way that we hoped, and to recognize that we are capable of letting go of these feelings, of letting go of how our problems make us feel, is one of the greatest gifts.
I forgive you.
And that's the philosophy that drives Ted Lasso, because optimism is his middle name. Ted takes this gift of being able to let go of the problems that make him sad, and just like a goldfish, forget about them. Ted then covers his problems with his blanket of optimism, and that's not healthy. Because that blanket of optimism, the blanket of Ted Lasso, has holes. And as the problem gets bigger and bigger, the threads of that blanket will be stretched until being a goldfish is no longer possible. There are some problems that can't be treated with Ted's philosophy, with Ted's optimism, because sometimes these problems aren't small enough for the blanket to cover, and trying to stretch that blanket over it causes each thread to stretch to its limits, and it seems to leave the problem more exposed than before. And that's a problem. Because if there's one thing that Ted Lasso highlights, it's the genuine struggles that characters have. Because again, people have problems. But as much as Ted Lasso wants to be the goldfish, he suffers from deep-rooted trauma that cannot be solved by being the goldfish. Because deep down, despite the show addressing both toxic masculinity and the stigma of mental health, one problem lies deep at the root of both these ideas, and are central to the struggles that characters feel in Ted Lasso. And that problem is parents.
They fill you with the faults they had and add some extra, just for you.
At the core of toxic masculinity, the stigma of mental health, and other core issues in personal development, there comes a trauma handed down by parents, whether intentional or not. Ted Lasso, at its core, is a story about parents. Throughout the show, Many parental figures shape the experiences, personalities, and emotional well-being of the characters, and the primary parental figure that Ted Lasso focuses on are fathers. For example, Jamie's emotionally distant relationship with his father fueled a constant pressure to excel and become the best as he developed an insatiable need for validation. His father's emotional abuse and arrogance causes Jamie to break down and lash out, allowing another positive father figure in the form of Roy Kent to pick up his pieces. Rebecca's relationship with her father is shown through his infidelity and mistreatment of her mother. As a parallel to Rebecca's relationship with Rupert, she despises her father and mistreatment of her mother, despite her mother knowing it. She harbors resentments to both her parents that influence her view of them.
Then I hate you too.
Nate's relationship with his father is highlighted by a lack of validation and constant feelings of inadequacy. As Ted begins to notice Nate's genius, he slowly becomes obsessed with the validation he receives and the declining validation he receives from Ted.
You made me feel like I was the most important person in the whole world. And then you abandoned me.
He builds resentment towards others and on the expectations placed on himself. These examples showcase just how deeply parents can affect their children in negative ways. But not all fathers are negative examples throughout the show. Sam's relationship with his father is one of admiration and praise as his father influences Sam's positive outlook and decisions with life. Fueled by love for one another, Ola is shown to be one of the healthiest father figures in the show. Sam also serves as a reflection of how his father raised him, as he is one of the kindest characters in the show. Roy, though not technically a father, is a positive father figure to his niece, Phoebe. As he shares experiences and parts of himself with her, she also provides Roy with a sense of purpose and helps him embrace vulnerability and empathy, which allows him to become the best version of himself. He also becomes a mentor to Jamie, and the two of them begin a wonderful friendship together.
Pedal! That's it! Aye.
All of these characters and their relationships with their father figures help shape the story of the show. But the biggest example of how fathers play an important role is through Ted. Because Ted is the biggest father figure in the show, primarily because he serves as a father figure for the team as head coach. Throughout the show, however, we see Ted struggling with multiple facets of fatherhood in his personal life. He struggles with being a father to Henry, who is halfway across the world and is experiencing the difficulties with his parents' divorce and the absence of his father, a feeling that Ted knows all too well. Because for Ted, his blanket of optimism has always been covering his deep-rooted trauma that his father had left behind. And the trauma of suddenly losing a father, of losing the person he loved and admired, grew and grew until the blanket could not cover it anymore. That was his problem. The loss of his father shaped his worldview, his relationships with others, his optimistic approach to life, his willingness to never give up, and his view of his mother.
And you. You're not working on yourself. We're seeking help after we lost Dad.
Because that loss defined him, and he couldn't let it go. So he tried to bury it underneath the blanket of Ted Lasso. But this problem couldn't be covered up. Hearing Ted talk to Dr. Fieldstone about his experience with his father broke me. Throughout the show, it was apparent that the characters had been able to take their problems and let go of them. Seeing Ted talk to Jamie about forgiving his dad, not for Jamie's dad, but for Jamie himself, allowed him to move on and start to let go of his resentments towards him.
You choose to do that, you're giving that to yourself.
Seeing Rebecca rickroll all of us at her father's funeral allowed herself to start to let go of the resentment she felt for her father and to move on to more positive aspects of life. Seeing Nate's father say that he just wanted his genius of a son to be happy allowed Nate to start to let go of the expectations placed on himself and any resentments that he harbored. Seeing all the characters start to let go of what's been holding them back was a gift for each of them. It allowed them to start becoming the best versions of themselves, both on and off the field. But for Ted, he wasn't able to let go of these resentments for so long because he wasn't able to let go of his father. He never got a chance to say goodbye, because being able to say goodbye is one of life's greatest gifts. During one of the darkest times in my life, when my father was in the hospital, unable to move, unable to speak, and unable to open his eyes anymore, I can't help but feel grateful that I was able to say goodbye, that I was able to speak to him, alone, holding his hand and hearing the noise of his monitor beeping. I told him that everything was going to be okay, that our family will be okay, and if he's ready, he can move on. And then I told my father that I loved him, something I should have told him so much more during my life. But I was a man. I couldn't let go of these ideas of toxic masculinity and the stigma of mental health when I spoke to him previously, because I had been struggling with depression for a long time. I was unable to share any of my feelings with others, especially my father. I was unable to tell him how much he meant to me, how much I loved him, and how much I wanted him to know that he was loved. I was emotionally detached from everyone. I was the perfect, toxic, masculine man. And seeing my father on that hospital bed broke this facade of masculinity that I was keeping up. I told him that I loved him, that I've always loved him, and he was an amazing dad. I then kissed him on his forehead and hugged him one last time. I left his hospital room after saying goodbye. And in the morning, before I could properly wake up, my sister burst into my room and told me he had passed away in the night. Being able to say goodbye to him the night before was a gift, and I'm so grateful for it, despite feeling like I wasn't the perfect son. And the fact that Ted couldn't say goodbye to his father breaks my heart. He was unable to let go of him during his final moments and has carried that weight with him this entire time. But if there's one thing that Ted Lasso has taught me, it's that letting go is one of the greatest gifts we can give ourselves. Watching season 3 of Ted Lasso, I couldn't help but think how they're going to end it all. How we're going to have to deal with this end of Ted Lasso. And to my surprise, the show felt that it wasn't just about Ted anymore. It was about everyone, each with their own little stories. And you can like or dislike that aspect of the show, about this new Ted Lasso that they've created. But when the final episode aired, I was shocked at how they ended it. I always thought that the show was going to end with them winning it all, with them succeeding. And although it was super satisfying to see their last win, they only got second place after Man City. But again, the show was never about that. It was never about the wins or the losses, but it was about how to say goodbye and let go. To let go of our expectations of masculinity, to let go of that stigma of mental health, and to let go of Ted, who can return home to Kansas and be a positive presence in his son's life. Because that's what his son needs as much as Ted needed it. The final moments as we see Ted leave, I was scared of it all ending. I desperately wanted to hold on. I thought it would feel devastating not being able to have such a positive show and influence in my life anymore. But seeing Ted reunite with Henry, seeing the blanket of Ted Lasso cover the one person who truly needed it, I couldn't help but smile. Because we got to say goodbye. And letting Ted Lasso go was one of the greatest gifts we could have received. Because we were lucky enough to feel the warmth of such an amazing show.